There's violence on the streets of Minneapolis over the Trump administration's efforts to deport illegal immigrants. Let's dive in. Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Remember, if you want to watch the show instead of just listen, youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows. youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows. I have been very successful in keeping my kids from photobombing the video. But will it continue today? You can only find out on youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows. I encourage parents and teens or preteens to listen to the podcast together. Parents, remember, you are your children's most important teacher. I encourage you to use this podcast as a way to talk through issues together. Now, regular listeners know that I'm a Christian and a conservative, but we start each show with arguments from either a secular or a liberal perspective. And we try and explain the appeal of the arguments that I disagree with and you may disagree with. And remember, if you disagree with me, it's okay. I won't be offended. I won't be hurt. But it's important for our teens to learn why another side, another perspective has appealing arguments. And they do. It doesn't make them right, but it does make them appealing. Remember, if you want to debate like Charlie Kirk teen or ask questions like Ali Stuckey, you must understand your opponent's argument. And oh boy, today we don't just have a hot button issue, we have a hot button current event that stems from a hot button issue. So let's have our first pause point. That's another unique thing about this podcast. I do encourage you to actually stop the podcast and discuss these questions together. What have you heard about what's happening in Minnesota? And if you haven't heard anything, that's okay. That makes you normal. It's not normal to be obsessed with every little thing that's happening in the world. But there is something important happening, and we need to figure out what it is. So today we're going to talk about ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement operations in Minnesota to deport people who are here illegally. Now, I just want to encourage you that anytime you hear discussion about a current event, especially one where there's a lot of heated commentary, you need to ask a slightly revised version of question 5 of the grade 8 questions. Instead of what do you mean by that, you need to ask what happened? Because the facts on the ground matter an awful lot. Let's have a pause point. Can you think of a scenario where you would not get in trouble for intentionally pushing your younger sibling? Now, I don't know how many kids are in your family. We may or may not have our fair share of squabbles and physical altercations in the Jakes household. But every once in a while, there'll be a push or a shove, and it won't get someone in trouble. Why could that be? Well, imagine this scenario. Imagine a 10-year-old sees his 6-year-old brother, and he's out into the middle of the street, and there's a car coming, and the brother only has time to push him out of the way. Oh, well, that would change things. You know, if someone said, well, the 10-year-old pushed the 6-year-old, as a parent, your first reaction is, oh boy, he's going to get it. He's in trouble. But then the context matters. If he did that to protect his 6-year-old brother, that makes things a lot different. So we've got to keep that in mind as we listen today, as we hear what's happening. We have to ask ourselves, what actually happened? Do we have the full context? Now, this is a big challenge in situations like this because there is a rush to social media with videos. And there's a couple of reasons for videos going online so quickly. One, what's happening is of immense public interest. That's important. People are curious. If you are the person with the video out first or the outlet with the video out first, you get more followers, more fame, more money. Now, notice I didn't say that necessarily leads to more truth. Because sometimes the first video out leave something out. Sometimes there's another perspective. Sometimes there's something we aren't seeing. Sometimes there's something we didn't see that led up to the thing that everyone's gawking at on social media. Someone just showed you a picture of the 10-year-old pushing the 6-year-old. You'd think, wow, the 10-year-old did something wrong. And then if there was another video showing, oh, there was a car coming and he prevented his 6-year-old brother from really getting hurt, that would change things. So anytime there's a rush and there's first video, take a breath, take a pause, and see if we can figure out fully what happened. And another reason that people rush to put out these videos is it sets a narrative. A narrative is a term you might have heard before, but all that term means is basically how people are interpreting the facts. There's a lot of facts in the world. There's a lot of things going on. And so we have to have a narrative or a worldview for certain things to kind of make sense of it all. And so most people don't have a lot of time to spend, hours and hours a day looking at things like this. And if you aren't getting paid to, you should not. It's much better use of your time to spend time with God, with your family, to build and create stuff, to work out. But the videos that are out first do set the narrative, the interpretation of what happened. There's an old saying about how a lie is halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on. The lie in the age of social media makes it all the way around the world. All right, so that's a long setup into what we're going to discuss. The Trump administration is currently removing illegal immigrants, and there is a concerted effort to do this in Minneapolis because Minneapolis officials, Minnesota officials, and state and local and county jails, if someone was arrested who's an illegal immigrant, they don't hand that person over to ICE to be deported. And so the Trump administration is having to go in and arrest people to deport them. There are organized efforts in Minnesota to stop this from happening. That includes people tracking ICE vehicles, swarming ICE officers, blowing whistles at them. The anti-ICE forces want to prevent ICE from deporting illegal immigrants. And remember, ICE stands for Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And tragically, 2 people have lost their lives after confrontations with ICE. Now, there are lots and lots of issues to discuss here. I am going to do my absolute best to keep this to 30 minutes. We'll see how I do. All right, so we're going to start with the side that I disagree with. We're going to make the best arguments possible we can. Here's the first one. Those opposed to ICE are simply exercising their First Amendment rights. Governor Tim Walz recently urged residents, carry your phone with you at all times. If you see these ICE agents in your neighborhood, take out that phone and hit record. Help us create a database of the atrocities against Minnesotans. In an op-ed, Walz wrote, Minnesotans aren't taking the bait. They are protesting loudly and urgently, but also peacefully. They're helping their neighbors cope with this violent, lawless assault on people of color throughout the state. Well, this is all protected by the First Amendment. Peaceful protest? The protest? That's important. That's one of the freedoms we enjoy as Americans. Look at what it says right there in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition their government for a redress of grievances. All right, let's have a pause point. What activities are and aren't included in the right to peacefully assemble? All right, argument number 2. ICE has committed atrocities. In contrast to the peaceful protesters, ICE is kidnapping children and murdering people. Last week, this was a New York Times headline. Detention of 5-year-old by federal agents incenses Minneapolis. Wow, that sounds bad. What is ICE doing with a 5-year-old? Here's what the New York Times wrote. A 5-year-old boy wearing a Spider-Man backpack and an oversized hat was detained with his father by immigration authorities on Tuesday, one of 4 students recently apprehended in a suburban Minneapolis school district, school officials said. The pre-kindergarten pupil is pictured in a photo released by the school system as he stands next to a vehicle with an adult's hand on his backpack. His father is not in sight. The image prompted outrage in the Twin Cities area, where many people have been angered since mid-December by the Trump administration's surge in deployment operations. And the superintendent of schools there asked, Why detain a 5-year-old? It's outrageous. The federal officials, they're supposed to be going after hardened criminals, not little children. This is what Kamala Harris, almost president, said. Liam Ramos, that's the young man, that's the boy, is just a baby. He should be at home with his family, not used as bait by ICE and held in a Texas detention center. I am outraged, and you should be too. All right, let's have a pause point. Regardless of what you think of this specific situation, can you think of a good reason for a federal agent to stay with a 5-year-old? Let's test yourself there. All right. Example number 2. On Saturday, federal agents shot and killed a man by the name of Alex Pretty. I think I'm going to go with Pretty. This is how the Washington Post described it. Federal agents who were wrestling a man to the ground in Minneapolis early Saturday morning had already secured a handgun he was carrying by the time they fatally shot him, according to a Washington Post analysis of videos that captured the incident from several angles. As many as 8 agents were attempting to detain Alex Pretty, a 37-year-old ICU nurse, videos show. One emerged from the scrum holding Pretty's gun, having removed it from his waistband area. Less than a second later, the first of what appeared to be 10 shots was fired. It was not clear from the video whether the other agents realized Pretty, who local authorities believe had a permit to carry the weapon, had been disarmed. Now, DHS, after the shooting, claimed that this looked like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. Now, that's obviously untrue. If you wanted to shoot law enforcement officers, you would stand back and shoot law enforcement officers. You would not approach them with a camera in your hand and a gun in your waist belt. That is just ridiculous spin. And so ICE is committing atrocities. And that leads us to our third point. Therefore, ICE should leave. Governor Tim Walz, Minnesota's governor, this is the case he is making. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, he wrote, the Trump administration's assault on Minnesota long ago stopped being a matter of immigration enforcement. It is a campaign of organized brutality against the people of our state. It isn't just, it isn't legal, and critically, it isn't making anyone any safer. Quite the opposite. Immigration agents have now shot and killed 2 of our neighbors, Renee Good and Alex Pretty. And there are countless other stories of protesters and bystanders being physically attacked by federal agents, to say nothing of the chaos and violence being unleashed against the targets of these raids. So you see, we can't trust ICE to enforce the law. They should just leave. That's how you could bring calm and peace to the situation, is get out. Then everything can go back to normal. All right, before we get to the responses to those arguments, let me tell you about a great book that I recently read called Memory Burn. It was written by J.T. Lindstrom. Memory Burn is set in a dystopian future where AI definitely hasn't improved the world. It has terrific action sequences and memorable characters like Elias Vane. He's a smuggler who takes a no questions job that leads to lots of questions, especially about his past. You see, the AI that runs the world in Memory Burn has optimized humans by erasing their memories. Now, I have to give you fair warning. I definitely stayed up way too late one night finishing this book because it was just so good. Both of my older kids also really enjoyed reading Memory Burn. Check it out today. Okay, I just want to say that there is a lot here. There are a lot of, this is, the old analogy, this is like an onion. There's just a lot of layers to unpack here. And so we're going to do our best. And we'll start with this pause point. Which of the great 8 questions would you apply here? And as a reminder, the great 8 questions are the questions that we put in our mental toolbox to be able to dive in and figure out what's happening with an issue or a situation. We don't just want to take what's being said. Teenager, you don't want to just take what I'm saying. You want to think about it. And these questions are tools that help us to think. Question 1, what happens next? Question 2, has this been tried before? Question 3, is there a principle involved? Question 4, what are the trade-offs? Question 5, what do you mean by that? Or in this situation, what actually happened? Question 6, is this an appeal to emotion or logic? Question 7, am I focused on the speaker or the argument? And question 8, what does the Bible say? All right, so we're going to look at the arguments that were made here. Argument number 1, the protests are peaceful. All right, remember, if you do not select the question that I selected, you didn't do something wrong. There's lots of ways to unpack these arguments. I'm going to use 2 questions here. The modified question 5 of what actually happened, and question 3, is there a principle involved? Because yes, you absolutely do have the right as an American to peacefully protest. And that's a wonderful right. That is a precious thing that we have here in America that's protected here. And I don't want to lose that right. I want people who disagree with me to be able to exercise that right. But it has to be done peacefully. So I'm going to lay out a few scenarios. Feel free to pause and talk about each one and tell me if you think this is a peaceful, tell your parents, discuss it together. Do you think this is a peaceful protest? 1, gathering on a sidewalk or in front of a government building and holding signs. Okay, yeah, I think that would qualify as peaceful. Scenario number 2, blocking traffic or vehicles, some of which contain ICE agents. No, no, that is not a peaceful protest. Just because you're protesting something doesn't mean you get to violate traffic laws. Scenario number 3, interfering when a federal agent arrests someone. If you don't like that they're arresting them, if you don't think that illegal immigrants should be deported, is it peaceful? Is it a peaceful protest to physically interfere with a federal agent who's arresting someone? No, that's not a peaceful protest. All right, number 4. What about targeting cars that you think are ICE vehicles? There have been some videos online that show these supposedly peaceful protesters going up to someone and basically demanding to know if they are ICE or not. And the person having to prove that they're just a normal person. It's actually happened to a New York Times reporter from a recent article. This is what the reporter writes. Earlier that day, outside a church that was distributing aid, I overheard a young man on his phone reporting a confirmed ICE vehicle. I looked around for it until I realized he was reading off the license plate from my rental car. Oh, okay. Look, I'm sorry. You don't have the right to put people's cars into a database and then sick other people on those cars, the people in those cars, to harass them. That's not peaceful protesting. Okay, how about scenario number 5? Storming into a church and disrupting the service because the pastor may be connected to ICE. Is that peaceful protesting? No, and that's not a hypothetical scenario either, because last week protesters went into a church and did exactly that. Here's how Fox describes it. A mob of anti-ICE agitators stormed a church Sunday in St. Paul, Minnesota, interrupting a worship service after protesters claimed a pastor inside was affiliated with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Video shows agitators chanting "Justice for Renee Good" inside the sanctuary at City's Church as the service began, raising concerns among law enforcement and religious leaders about protesters targeting houses of worship amid escalating anti-ICE demonstrations across the Twin Cities. And I'm going to read just a little bit more about what happened here. If I can find it. Maybe I can't find it. Oh, here we go. This is from an ex account, Tyler O'Neill. An agitator continued to scream in the faces of young children while they were crying. That was happening in the church. One of the ringleaders of this agitation said that the church cannot pretend to be a house of God while harboring someone who is directing ICE agents to wreak havoc upon our community who killed Renee Good. And as a result of this agitation, one woman broke her arm. Congregants were terrorized. Our children were weeping. College students and young women were sobbing. It was impactfully and will take time to work through. That's what happened at this. That's what happened in Minnesota last week. Was that a peaceful protest? No, No, that was not a peaceful protest. And so what we've got to be able to do is say, yes, peaceful protest is okay. And I'm sure there are some peaceful protests going on, but much of what's happening in Minnesota is not peaceful. It's breaking the law. And in some cases, the quote unquote protesters have been violent. Okay, and it's important to note there have not been any reports of federal agents interfering with actually peaceful protest. When there's been conflict, it's come from violent and illegal quote unquote protest efforts. All right, let's look at argument number 2. Well, ICE has committed atrocities. Okay, this is why it's so important to know the whole story. Because just like if someone says, oh, the 10-year-old pushed the 6-year-old, well, that sounds bad. And then you find out the 10-year-old pushed the 6-year-old in order to protect him from an oncoming car. Those details really matter. So same thing with this kidnapping claim. What happened is last week, ICE conducted a targeted operation to arrest the young boy's father. As agents approached, the father ran away. He ran away from the car. He ran away from the car with his child in the car. And so while other agents pursued the father, an ICE officer remained with the child. Now, why would an officer remain with the child? Because he's 5 years old. Because it's freezing. You can't just leave a 5-year-old because the father abandoned him. And so once you know the full details, it's not ICE kidnapping a child. It's ICE protecting a child who's been abandoned by his father. And the reason that the child is now in custody with the father in Texas is because the mother didn't want the child to stay with her, and the father wanted the child to come with him. Again, this is a much different story once you know the whole context. All right, let's look at the death of Alex Preddy. Okay, I don't encourage you to go watch the video. I'm going to try and describe what's happening in the video. And I do just want to say at the outset, it is not exactly clear what's happening in the half a second before the first shot rings out. And there should be a full investigation. And we should feel comfortable saying, I look at this, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's happening. And an agency has people that go in and investigate things. That's what they do. That's absolutely should be investigated. But I just want you to step back and see, where is the outrage? The outrage is about this half a second decision instead of everything that led up to the shot. What we do know, Walls and others have been urging people to take to the streets, tacitly encouraging confrontations. That's bad. You should not be encouraging people to interfere with law enforcement operations. If you think something's wrong, go to a court. That's why we have courts. That's why what makes us have a civil society is we don't have to settle disputes with violence. We know very clearly that Preddy moved toward federal officers who were engaged in a job. That was a mistake. Now people will rush and say, well, he didn't deserve to die for it. Okay, I agree. He did not deserve to die for it. We still do not know what happened right before the shot, if the shooting was justified or not. But do you see the difference here? What the left is doing, what the media is doing, is they're focusing in on this half a second, split second decision instead of all of the decisions that led to the crisis point. All right, this is from CBS News. Preddy moves between the protester and the officer, reaching his arms out toward the officer. Okay, do you see? Here's another problem. This is no longer a peaceful protest. Preddy is getting involved with a law enforcement officer who's engaged with another protester. The officer deploys pepper spray and Preddy raises his hand and turns his face. The officer grabs Preddy's hand to bring it behind his back and deploys the pepper spray canister again and then pushes Preddy away. Seconds later, at least a half a dozen federal officers surround Preddy, who is wrestled to the ground and hit several times. Several agents try to bring Preddy's arm behind his back and he struggles. Okay, here's another thing. If the police are arresting you, do not struggle. What a blessing to live in the United States of America, where there is a court system. Very oftentimes, there is body camera. Nothing good happens if you fight back to law enforcement. Now, if you live in a country without the rule of law, maybe things are different. But what a blessing that we live in the United States of America. Okay, so I just want you to see, none of this is saying the shooting was justified. None of this is saying that anyone is happy that Preddy died. No, obviously it is a tragedy. But look at the deliberate decisions that were made to create that situation. Those were terrible choices made by lots of people, including Preddy, and we should be encouraging people to not make those choices. And we should, yes, we absolutely should assign blame to people who attack law enforcement, who interfere with law enforcement. Even if the investigation shows that something was done wrong by a law enforcement officer later on. All right, let's have a pause point. Should police let someone go who resists arrest? I really want you to think about this question, because arresting people is ugly work. Trying to physically restrain someone is not easy. Trying to physically restrain an agitator and you do not know what weapons they may or may not have, that is ugly, ugly work. And the reason that we tell people to cooperate with police is because you don't want to put law enforcement in a situation where they're having to make split-second decisions. Because a law enforcement officer could die, a person could die. Again, there needs to be a full investigation, full accountability. But do you see how this situation never had to happen? All right, and so this leads to kind of the concluding argument, which is that ICE should leave Minnesota. Okay, I'm actually going to wrap this argument into my argument for the correct side. And here's my argument. Violent rioters should not receive a de facto veto over federal law enforcement agencies that are enforcing federal law. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Violent rioters should not receive a de facto veto over federal law enforcement agencies enforcing federal law. Okay, let's go to question 3. Is there a principle involved here? Yes, there's a very important principle. The federal government must be able to enforce federal law. There's something in the United States called the Supremacy Clause, that the federal government doesn't get to be involved in everything, but when the federal government is involved in an issue, and immigration is very clearly a federal government issue, the federal government runs the ship, runs things. A state can't come and say, yeah, no, we don't like that. We're not doing that. And we're going to physically resist you, federal government, when you try and make that happen. This is, by definition, an insurrection. Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition of insurrection: the act or an instance of open revolt against civil authority or a constituted government. And that's what we have here. The federal government is going into Minneapolis to enforce federal immigration law, and many people in Minnesota, including the governor, including the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, are saying, no, we don't want that. And so we are going to break the law, interfere with your operations, go after ICE agents, Border Patrol agents who are simply enforcing the law. And I hope you kind of see the play that's happening here. You know, Tim Walz doesn't want a specific person to die. I'm not going to say that. But what he wants is he wants these situations to happen to make ICE look bad, to build up political pressure on President Trump so that Trump has to withdraw the troops. Again, he's looking for a rioter's veto. This is an extremely dangerous situation. Let me ask you a question. Another pause point. How can the law be changed? Because what you have to understand is that what we have in America, where we have traded bullets for ballots, is not normal. That doesn't just happen. If you go throughout the history of the world, who is the person that sets the law? Well, who is the civil authority that sets the law? The person who's the best at committing violence. And if you want to change the law, well, then you better get good at committing violence so you can overthrow the person in charge, the ruler in charge, the empire in charge. And one of the incredible things about America is we said, no, we're not going to do that. Instead of fighting each other physically, we're going to fight each other with our ideas. We're going to discuss them. We're going to go out and try and convince people that our way is best. And look at what has happened in the last 2 years. President Trump, whether you like him or you don't like him, he went to the American people and said, we are going to deport illegal immigrants, and we're especially going to deport criminal illegal immigrants. And the American people, in a free and fair election, went to the ballot box and said, that guy, we want him in charge. And so right now, what President Trump is doing is what he promised to do. He's a politician who keeps his campaign promises. And the left is saying no, and we are going to violently resist you. That is dangerous, dangerous territory. They're saying our bullets trump your ballots. That simply does not end well. If you want to change federal immigration law, fine, go make your case to the American people. Do not try and physically stop the ICE agents who are simply enforcing the law. All right, second argument here. What should the solution be? Why is the federal government in Minneapolis, but not in Austin or Nashville or Las Vegas? Well, it's simple. What the federal government wants is when local or state police arrest someone, they would like to be notified if that person is an illegal immigrant. And then what can happen is that person's already been arrested. They find out, oh, this is an illegal immigrant. Federal officials can simply come to the jail, take that person, and deport them. And in cities and in states all around the country, that's what's happening. But there are some cities and states that have said, oh no, we're sanctuary jurisdictions. We're not cooperating with federal officials. And that's what's happened in Minnesota. If you look at local and county jails, they don't talk to ICE. And so if you have someone who's been convicted of rape, if you have someone who's been convicted of murder, if you have someone who's been convicted of theft or battery and they're an illegal immigrant, well, the only way to remove that person is to physically go there, go to their home, and arrest them. It doesn't have to be that way. It isn't that way in most states around the country. What Minnesota needs to do is tell ICE that when an illegal immigrant is arrested by local or state police, they will tell ICE and let ICE come and take that person out of jail. And if that happens, ICE will not need to do this amount of work in Minneapolis. We've seen that all around the country. Again, if you go to question 2, has this been tried before? Would this bring peace in Minnesota? Well, yes, it's been tried before. It's been tried in states and cities all around the country. If you cooperate with ICE, they don't have to physically go into the community and arrest the criminals. They can simply pick them up from jail. If you enjoyed this podcast, I encourage you to subscribe on YouTube, or even better, send it to a friend. Help another parent prepare their teens for the arguments and issues they'll face. Be courageous like Charlie, stay sharp, and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.